And good evening and welcome to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And it is the 7th of the 10th, 2020. Time is really rushing by. Dark outside now at night when it used to be light when I was doing my 9 o'clock show. But I hope you are all well wherever you are around the world. 9 p.m. here in Ireland as it stands. I've got a packed show for you tonight. It is the 9th, yes, the 9th time that I'm introducing back to Out of the Bag the wonderful Ken Scott. Of course, you know him by now. He's the co-founder of the Panterra Private Contract Association, as well as the initiator of the Gemstone University and Media Alliance concept. As I said, it's the 9th in a series of interviews that will hopefully give people enough knowledge and information to free themselves from the bonds that tie us to the psychopathic matrix of debt and slavery. Check out www.panterrapca.org and of course www.gemstoneuniversity.org and Gemstone University's YouTube channel as well. Absolutely fantastic information. I'm sure you're looking forward to another 2 hours of Ken Scott on this week's Out of the Bag. So I will carry on with the show now, and take you through to the interview I did with Ken Scott. Now, there's a little bit of a technical difficulty we had. When I say technical difficulty, Ken was expecting a phone call, so we allowed him to take that phone call, so hopefully it doesn't interfere too much with the full recording. Here's my interview, the 9th interview with Ken Scott. And welcome to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And this is once again a pre-recorded interview. It is the 3rd of the 10th, 2020. And it will be going out on my show on the 7th, on Wednesday. And I am honoured to have back onto the show for the 9th show, for the 9th time, for the 9th month, co-founder of Panterra Private Contract Association, as well as the initiator of Gemstone University and Media Alliance concept, of course. It is Kenneth Scott. Welcome back to Out of the Bag, Ken.
Well, thank you, Sean. As always, it's a pleasure. I'm always looking forward to our next conversation, and here it is, arrived once again.
It certainly seems to go very quickly. It only seems like yesterday we were talking, do you know?
Yeah, it does, and it does. goes fast, and here we were. It was just a moment ago.
Yeah, and I've had 3 shows in between, and I have you're my one every 4th show, and for the last 9 months, and it has been incredible information. I hope people are enjoying it. And I suppose the first question I want to ask is, how are you this month? How are things going with all the craziness that's going on as well, and any news at all?
Well, I'm fine. Everything's going along fine in all that we're doing, not without its challenges and issues that have to be circumnavigated and or run right through the middle or whatever required. But in the overall sense, everything's going very well, and we're all doing well. And I did talk about some things in the last show that were anticipating things happening during the month of September. A lot of those things happened, but not the absolute completion of what we were expecting. So in one sense, there was something I anticipated I would be able to expand on detail in this show that I'm not going to be able to.
Okay.
But in the other sense, I had a logical next step in the dialogue. One of the questions that was sent in that we're going to address actually brought that up. And so for the most part, everything that I had wanted to go to the next step in our sequential unfolding of everything is lined up, and we're going to cover all that today.
Great.
And then we'll look forward to the next show in early November with, I think, a lot more interesting detail to cover.
Great stuff. That's really good. And just to let my listeners know, in the interim, I've had quite a few questions from various people from around the world who have asked me to put those questions to you on this or future shows. So I sent those to you, and you've been having a look at them, Ken.
Yes. So what I'm going to do is do a quick summary identify or highlight key points in the questions, and then go into laying a foundation of where I had intended to. And then during the course of the show, we will talk about the foundational subject that I'm going to introduce, and then we'll circle back around and touch on all the questions and kind of weave it all together into a beautiful fabric and wrap it up and close with whatever we close and cover it all.
That sounds absolutely wonderful, Ken.
So going through these, one individual asks, she said that she has been looking for, I made reference to a proclamation last time, and she's been looking for that. The proclamation, in her words, which is pretty much what I said, would shield people of the planet from forced injections, aka vaccinations, and where can I find this? So I'm just going to go through these without answering initially, then we'll come back around. She goes on to say that there are increasing signs of looming civil war in the U.S., and how do we see the ability for the U.S. population, and really in a lot of ways the global, but the focus is the U.S., the ability to avoid this kind of confrontation or navigate through it, and is Panterra able to keep itself out of the fray? How can people in the U.S. or the rest of the planet avoid the globalist New World hell of transhumanistic AI social credit system, and would Panterra be immune to that? She also is concerned that it seems like historically, she makes reference to the Anunnaki, and of course it's not just Anunnaki, they're just one race line, but they obviously influenced our world significantly with Sumer and Babylon and everything that followed through Rome, and then the modern time in terms of social constructs, religion, law, and politics, and so forth. And her question was, well, what hope do we have of surviving this onslaught of everything they have, conventional armies and weapons, biologics, nuclear, geoengineering, mind and emotional control weapons, since they, Anunnaki, have a history of violating laws, including the universal law of free will, if that really exists. So
that's a big one.
That's her. That's a big one. That's very, we could spend half a day on that one alone. Somebody asks, are you familiar with John Smith's common law courts? Yes, I am, and we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Although that first question and the foundation subject may be all-consuming of 2 hours, so I'll touch on it a little bit, but that too is a more detailed conversation, and it has to do with what I talked about last show in terms of how status correction works, and how having a private society enables us to create our own law form and jurisdiction and courts and related things. So it relates to that, and I'll at least touch on it before we close.
Okay, that's great.
Next, someone asks, what is the location of Gemstone University, and is the Panterra Society in the same place as the university or on a different location? The next question is, he would like to know if Ken, thinks there will be significant improvements to the world in banking and in general when Trump is reelected. Very good question. Next, he asks, same one, he says, Ken says that as long as we're in their jurisdiction, we have to follow all their rules, including masks, etc. I've noticed that the mask mandate in the U.S. and other countries are not laws, but orders by government officials. They are mandates. We'll get to that. Yes, there's a difference between substantive law, color of law, legal law, which is really legal codes and statutes, and things such as, executive orders and mandates and things like that. So we'll come back to that. Same questioner asks, He says, you say, Ken, that humanity and the earth was conquered by AI aliens who programmed duality in the enemy construct. But then in your document overview of the world system, you speak of, quote, the nasty controllers of this containment field. And he asks, is that not an enemy construct? And then he says, if you don't consider them an enemy, how do you characterize them? Very good question. Same man goes on to ask, or no, this is actually a woman. You say with conviction that the cabal has been defeated under Trump, but I understand that since Trump declared national emergency, he's no longer in charge, but that FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Act and agency, is by virtue of a series of executive orders over the decades. She's saying, I understand that Trump, is not in charge. I'll go into that. Then she asked, how do you, hang on.
Somebody's trying to get hold of you.
Yeah, I know. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Let me close that. That's signal. Okay, there we go. Okay, then.
So as for Trump being a good guy.
Right, Trump being a good guy, then she asks, well, how do you square that or align that with his Operation Warp Speed, expediting a so-called vaccine, his funding of Gavi, Gavi, which is a Gates-controlled vaccine entity, and also contracting for 100 million doses of Moderna's vaccine. And she goes on to quote some other things I won't go into. Then she asked about Joseph Farrell in the Cosmic War. This is a well-read individual, very nice. Joseph Farrell discusses Nazi technology that could affect emotions. Considering the overwhelming majority of mass-wearing COVIDians, good way to put them, how can such apparent mass hypnosis be countered? Okay, very good. And that's pretty much it. So very good questions. Thank you, everybody who submitted those. And so we will come back and, as I said, weave these into the conversation. So what I am going to introduce today is a could call it a group, an organization, really ultimately it's a body politic, and it's the primary people of that body politic that I have been connected to for about 18 months, and I've been working very in-depth and seriously with them for about 12 to 14 months. And it's going to, at first, give people a little bit of a spin, because they're going to very likely, very possibly say, well, Ken, a couple of sessions ago you spoke about your perspective on religion and God and the Bible and all of that, that you don't see things the way the religious construct is, which is true. And yet here you're going to introduce something that's based on the Bible, and that there's a lot of people, in fact, really billions of people who see this in a particular way. And that's true too. So I'm going to explain how I see this and why this is so significant and so valuable, and how it functions or pertains to a lot of these questions, and especially our first group of questions where she asked, she said she was looking for the proclamation I mentioned and can't find it, and how's that going to work, and then other people ask, well, if all these Kabbalists have been pretty much running roughshod over this planet for thousands and many thousands of years, and just playing the domination and control agenda, how can we stop that? And in one of those questions, he or she said something about, it's actually the same one who asked about the proclamation, talking about the Anunnaki and their history of violating laws, including the universal law of free will, if that really exists. Well, it's obviously a good question to ask. Does it really exist? And I can really only say it is up to each living being to determine that for themselves. Does it really exist? But you have to be absolutely fiercely self-honest in evaluating one's relationship to the world system. And in order to do that, you have to have the depth of understanding, information and understanding about how it works, which we've been discussing in the last 8 sessions, and I extensively write about and talk about in what I do, that you really have to understand how the world system works. You cannot presume that you know how it works at the surface level that almost everybody is operating on, including many, many people who are quite awake. Obviously, this woman asking these questions, and really everybody in these questions, and I'm sure many of your listeners, they are quite awake. And they have a lot of expanded opening awareness, capacity, and so forth. But very few people know truly at the depths of how it is fundamentally constructed, how the law system works on the planet. I happen to be an expert, and at this point in my life and process would say I'm a master of it. It took me 30 years to master law. And on top of that, another 30 years of extensive investigation into many, many other things. So it's not a deprecating comment that I make that you don't understand law, and therefore you can't understand at the level that I can see and understand how this kind of question could be answered. I understand why you would say, does free will really exist? It gets down to the fundamental that I've discussed in our discussions, which is that all law is contract, and it is simple as that, but it's quite profound. You have to understand how contract works. And when I say most people, even many, if not most of the people studying law, they still don't understand this fundamental point that when they go into polarity, in what I call the enemy construct, and see the enemy outside, and essentially, whether consciously or not, take a position of victimhood. Well, I'm a victim. I should not have to deal with this stuff, and I don't care about law. And you say that I've volunteered for, but I didn't volunteer, and therefore, I think your premise and your conclusion is not accurate. But the fact is that it is, that we all have contracts in place that are binding, and that they have been designed and constructed on a level and on a basis of aligning with and adhering to the principle, the universal law and principle of sovereign free will. And essentially it boils down to, if I have sovereign free will, and you know what, Sean, can you put, I forgot to tell you before we started, I have one phone call I have to take. Can you put us on hold? I've got to listen, take this call, and then I'll
sure. I will stop the recording and we'll start it again in a bit.
Okay, good. I'll be right back.
Welcome back to Out of the Bag. This is Sean Maguire live on Healing Oracle Radio and People's Internet Radio. And sorry about the interruption, but we're continuing now the conversation with Ken Cousens. Ken, are you back with me?
Yes, yeah.
Brilliant.
So I was talking about law and contract and the issue of free will. What I know as an absolute through my direct process, my entire life, 66 years, at least 60 of which I've been studying whatever fell before me to study, and then, of course, law for the last 30 years. And I have often said that it was the study of law that galvanized and integrated my understanding of everything else, whether those were spiritual paths I pursued, studying history in the history of religion, quantum physics, which I studied as a layman, and health and biology, et cetera, et cetera. It really integrated and pulled it all together. Also, of course, as I've spoken of, the esoteric side and how to see it on both sides and how to integrate it and understand the nature of reality, the nature of who we are as creator capacity beings who actually create reality, not just experience it or live at the causal effect of somebody else's creation. So this is very empowering when you really take that in. And I know a lot of people who have been on the path, especially if they've integrated looking at the world of history, law, politics, and whatever with a spiritual grounding, that you already know that. You know that this is that we are the creator capacity. I won't say the creator. We are a individuated expression of creation itself. And as I talked about before, I don't see it as a creator, as an individual God person. And so, but if you really understand it and move past that question, do we have sovereign free will, and understand what I'm talking about in terms of law and contract, and take full and absolute responsibility. And so a lot of people will say, well, I'm not responsible for, the nasty stuff going on. Well, that's true. We're not. We did not choose to do those kind of things. But by the nature of our complete level of being as a creator capacity being, that if we have been programmed, which we have biologically, genetically, and in many, many other ways for millions of years and thousands of lifetimes, and we've become habituated to a pattern of behavior, and all of that is based on the dual mind or the binary mind that somebody asked about, that, the enemy construct, which we'll get into, that we are projecting through that filter of that, those layers upon layers of habituation into the genetics and the biology to project out a split reality. And that both gives us the level of responsibility, because if we take full responsibility, then we can transmute it and change it. And the other half of it, it gives us the opportunity to focus within and see where we have been split and separated and polarized in upon ourselves. But we are bigger than that. We are more capable of that. And when we stop acting in a victim mode, as if, no, we don't have free will, we are in a controlled, mechanistic, AI-controlled universe. We are not in such a universe. We are in a holographic containment field of a reality that makes it seem, from a lower level of perception, that we are all in it and can have no power in it. But that's part of the program. Okay.
So, and is it difficult, Ken? Because you say everything's contracts. You also have said that we've been controlled for thousands and thousands of years. Are there spiritual contracts that we are unaware of, that we can withdraw our consent from, just like we would from a physical?
Right. Exactly. And is it separate from the physical or not? Well, for as long as we're in the physical body and reality, it isn't separate. But what you're calling spiritual, let's call them metaphysical or multidimensional, that aren't per se, don't have their origination in the physical embodied reality that we're in. They still impact and affect the physical, because there's not really a separation. The physical is just a more slowed down, condensed, solidification of energy and forces. Because is there really anything that is physical? No. Anybody who's studying chemistry and physics knows that 99.99% of these bodies we're in are not even physical. but they are made up of electrical relationships, polarity, negative, positive, and nuclear forces.
And it seems bloody physical when you hurt yourself.
Yes, sure does. If you're driving 80 miles an hour into a brick wall, that's pretty damn physical, right?
Yeah.
So, so, let's digress a minute into that and come back to the main point that are there spiritual contracts? And then that led me into saying, well, what's the difference, spiritual, physical, and, mirror reflection and interwoven in a quantum whole? Well, one of the things that I strongly emphasize in our work in law, and yes, in world legal and law systems, the right and capacity to withdraw consent, to rescind a signature that applied both your spiritual unique frequency signature of who we are as a unique individuated expression of the whole, and then we bring that through into density into the body and down our left or right hand and into a pen that we put to a physical paper, and we sign a signature. We're putting our energetic signature onto a piece of paper that becomes binding as a contract, but we have the right to rescind that based on new information, new knowledge, new understanding, new awareness of law, and the fact that in law, in the regular 3D legal system, error and mistake is always a basis for rescinding a signature and nullifying a contract.
Yes.
So it's as simple as that. Oh, I made a mistake. I didn't realize that when you asked me to sign this paper, or my mother registered me as a birth, and then I applied for a driver's license, I didn't realize that I was attaching myself by contract to a system that now I'm a driver in commerce in your motor vehicles under your titles and licensing, and that everything I do, say, create, and express now is property of the state, and that I must follow the state's rules because I accepted benefits and privileges from that state as my consideration received from the contract. That was a mistake. It was an error. So I have the full capacity to rescind and revoke. We rescind a signature, we revoke the power of attorney that signature gave to somebody else, and we terminate the contract.
Okay.
And so back to free will, if we, she asked, well, do we really have free will? And I say, of course, an absolute, and that is an extremely empowering thing that we do have, because it gives us the free will to rescind the signature, revoke the power of attorney, and terminate the contract that binds us to that that field of reality, that jurisdiction. And that jurisdiction, as I've explained, is known as commerce. It's known as a domestic or a federal zone. And it all is hierarchically, pyramidally, as a pyramid, with the pinnacle of Washington, D.C. at the top of that, controlling the physical reality of humanity through national corporations and subdivisions known as franchises that we're attached to. And as one of the three city-states of the Triple Crown, created 718 years ago by the first papal bull that declared it, that Washington, D.C., controlling the physical through two things, the military for enforcement and the commercial monetary system by bondage and contractual attachment. Yeah. So we have a global military occupation. If you expand that onto a galactic level and then a universal level, you've got beings and hive mind Borg systems and races and so forth that for thousands and millions of years have been going through the universe one by one, binding the collective whole of the body, the planet, and the incarnation of the whatever the skin suit, as some people like to call it, of the the sentient incarnational beings in the same way. So so let's start from the basis that we do have free will, that we do have sovereign free will, and we've contracted it away. And then she references, well, the Anunnaki and the history of violating laws, but that's a presumption. It's a presumption from a position of being a victim that they violated the laws and they did harm and so forth. Well, there's no doubt that there's been a lot of beings who have harmed life to an absolute level and degree, destroyed civilizations, destroyed populations, destroyed planets, destroyed worlds.
You've got to realize, Ken, at this point that for a lot of people who are just looking at status correction and the system that we live in, I mean, we're now talking interplanetary, warfare and beings from all over the galaxy having an effect on our planet. Yeah. That's quite a shocking step for some people.
Well, I know. Yeah. And there's well, for a long time I stayed low-key and undercover. I did not go out in any way publicly talking about things at this level. But we are in a period that we all pretty much accept is called the apocalypse. Not necessarily having to do with how that's interpreted by a religious interpretation, and etymologically and in the original language that word comes from, it simply means to split open and reveal.
Yeah.
So we are in an apocalyptic period. I like to call it riding the waves of the apocalypse. If you ride the wave, you don't get smashed on the shore. You ride the wave.
Indeed, and let's revel in revelations.
Yeah, and there's a very extraordinary researcher named Jose Arguellos, who pretty much decoded a massive amount of the Mayan calendars and systems and so forth. And he wrote a book called The Waves of the Zavuya. But he interpreted, some Mayan scholars say he was full of shit, but, that's their opinion. And I don't say he got it precisely every component, but I like his work quite a bit.
Right.
And he found that the Mayans consider themselves travelers in time, and they rode a wave, and that wave they called the Zavuya,
Okay.
And so when you look at quantum physics, it talks about the uncertainty principle of whether we're a fixed particle or we're a wave, or any particle or subatomic particle is one or the other, and they're both. But the uncertainty is you can't see both instantly at the same time. If you focus on a particle, you can't see the wave in, let's call it, real time, the now of now. But if you focus on the wave, then the particle, you can't fix it in time. And my perception of things is that we have been condensed into a controlled containment field to such an extent that a major part of the purpose of that was to destroy our ability to ride the wave and become particularized, to be densified into an atomic structure that they could control through their physics and their technologies. Somebody asked about the control of emotions. Well, we're in a soup of controlled emotions 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
That's called frequency control. If you're talking about anything from chemtrails that use heavy particulate metals and other things, with HARP and scalar waves and other kind of waveforms to control frequencies and stimulate or suppress or activate or excite different things. We eat chemicals all day long filled with neurotoxins that are frequencies that are disruptive or disharmonic to a cohesive relationship between the mind, the heart, and the body, and things like that, all of which control our emotions, and all of which then contribute to mass mind control. And then the individual who asked that, let me see if I find that, asks, how do we... he asked about, or actually it was she, the majority of mask-wearing COVIDians, how can such apparent mass hypnosis be countered? By going within, and either I coined this or I adopted it from somebody who did, I can't remember, I've been saying it for decades, the only way out is in. And I've talked about religion and New Age, ascension concepts and things like that are always thinking that we got to get out of here. We got to get out, either the spaceships come pick us up or we ascend or, we get raptured and go up to heaven. All these things are all the variations on the same thing, which is directing our attention to there's a way to get out of here. You either earn it or learn it and you will get out, but it's always external to us. And what I say is, no, the only way out is in. We're not actually fully in our body. We're hardly even below the head. And most people are just completely entrained in their minds. That is hardwired to a binary reality, which means polarized, split, and all the rest of that. And
I'm just fed up, Ken, that people are looking to religion and whether it be modern, religion or not, instead of realizing that it's up to us together to create heaven on earth.
Right.
This is it.
This is it. But once we get in, then there is no out there, because fully embodied in our spirit, fully embodied in our body, which means all the way down to our root chakra, to our toes, absolutely proficient in moving through the frequency levels of the color range, which is called the visible spectrum, which if you look on a spread electromagnetic field or a chart of frequencies, the so-called visible spectrum, people talk about the frequency colors of the chakras, red for the root and all the other colors going up to the crown, which are 7 in number, that those correspond to those frequencies where red resonates at one frequency, yellow at another, green, and so forth. But that visible spectrum is just like a sliver in this entire electromagnetic frequency band.
Nice.
That's huge. That alone tells us we're locked into a containment field because we can't see beyond that. We can create externalized technology that can do it for us and see infrared and ultraviolet and radios and all the rest of it, and gamma rays and X-rays and everything. But we don't experience it. We're not in any way coherent with it, but it's all around us.
So we're blinkered from it.
We're blinkered, and however you want to say it. And I followed a logic combined with intuitive process in breaking down and decoding the world system in terms of law and everything else related to it, money and socioeconomic, political structures and all the rest of it. And so one simple example of that is when I learned that the name Rothschild means red shield. It's like, okay, red shield, shielding the red, monetary system, taking our internal capacity as a creator being and externalizing it into a contractual relationship by legal mechanisms to create this system called money that we're chasing constantly, and we're always delimited from how much we can get. It's never enough, even when somebody wants to do a pure motivated service to the world and to others and so forth. They can't get the money. The only ones who've ever been able to get large money are the ones who are, willing to bend the knee to the dominance and control system and do all the nasty things, and then they get, elevated up the ladder to become, the middle management of the elite. And but there's an intuitive leap to seeing that Rothschild red shield means shielding the red. Well, shielding the red means that we are blocked from getting into the root chakra. And now what's coming up in very advanced healing modalities that are emerging in the field of real healing are emotional healing, trauma healing, dealing with the trauma and all the things that have kept us out of the body, kept us into neuroses or disease or repetitive loops of habits and behavior and all the rest of that. And people are now getting into their body and getting down fully into the root chakra and finding that the bioresonant field that surrounds us is where the trauma and the emotional baggage and other things and karma from other lives is actually stored, and that you can use sound and light and other forms of frequency to stimulate and move that trauma out of your field. When you do that, you're healing, you're coming into balance. So the answer to the question is, how can we counter? Well, I wouldn't use the word counter because counter presupposes or posits a polarity. There's a force and a counter force. That's Newtonian physics that's kept us locked in to all of this. It's going in, centering, balancing, clearing, healing, and finding that we are so much more powerful. And the only way that we can be powerful is in a unified field. And that's not a hive Borg mind, subjugation of the unique identity that each of us is. It's highlighting and advancing the unique signature frequency of our true identity, our true being, but coming together in a co-creative, interdependent, cooperative way. When we do that, which we are in the process of doing that, the power of that to break down this false, polarized, seemingly invincible, when she said earlier in the thing, or somebody else did, about, they have all the weapons. And yes, they do. They have the armies, they have the weapons, and they have up until now controlled the money. And unless and until the money system collapsed, but not in a precipitous collapse, which was part of their agenda to collapse everything and have everybody be so traumatized and wiped out, basically, that they would readily contract to eternal bondage. And that was really the agenda, to get it to the point where we were prior to Trump coming into the office of the presidency. And if Hillary had won, we would have gone into nuclear war with Russia. China would have progressed to have everything from its social credit systems to its communist state and everything else, and buying up all of the assets, resources in Africa and everywhere else, and pretty much coming in and taking over the United States. That was completely set up to go. And that's why right now, in recent months, the Trump administration people have been more and more and more talking about what China was set to do. And with all the cooperation of the basically the democratic machine and everything the deep state had in place, it's being now taken out. And it would have been a cakewalk for China to take over this country, economically, monetarily, because they were in a position to do that.
Are they not doing that globally anyway? Still?
Well, they have been up until this point. But we work with a country in Africa as our first focal point, we meaning Panterra. The country is Sierra Leone, and we have contracts with the government to come in, and they've been waiting for us to get to a point to have the resources to do that, which I'll talk about either towards the end of this call or we'll do it next time.
Okay.
But Panterra and its alliances have those resources, and I'm going to get back to the foundation subject that I wanted to start with in a moment. But and the key is law and jurisdiction, so we'll come back to that. But anyway, so I've been working with our partner in Sierra Leone for 13 years, and we've been building towards where we're at now. And in the last almost 2 years, we've been building the relationship with the government, and things are about to start after the first of the year, and we're going to go in and we're going to build significant things to help and build co-partnership with the government and the people, important infrastructure on a large scale, on a national scale, as well as on a people scale. Villages, farms, housing, education, health, and all the rest of that. The reason I bring that up is because in talking to our partner on a practically daily basis for years, thanks to WhatsApp, by the way. When I met him 13 years ago, we could hardly ever connect, but with modern voice over IP technology, it makes the world very easy to work with. So, but he's been telling me over and over that Sierra Leone, for sure, because he's a native and he's totally immersed in that, but he interacts with a lot of people throughout Africa, all of Africa, except for those who are, sold out and taking bribes and doing what they do for their own benefit, not the country or the people. But the most of Africa, they do not like working with the Chinese because they come in and they say, well, we're going to do this for the people. It's the same rape and pillage economic model. They come in, they contract with the government, they get licenses to mine or do whatever, but mostly mining for raw materials or forestry materials. And they say it's for the people, but, read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Have you ever read that?
Yes, I've actually met the author.
Yeah. So he talks about how, economic hitmen went in, set all these things up, got the contracts. The IMF would come in and build a dam or a nuclear plant or whatever, did nothing for the people. It just raised GDP, raised debt, and brought the country to a level of debt that all of its exports and hard currency that it brought in could only just barely service the debt. So the result of that is private companies would come in and contract because the government could not raise any more capital, and they tried to build stuff for, to advance the country. But the Chinese and others, but the Chinese significantly would come in and contract to do a mine or a project and say, yeah, well, it's good for the country because it'll create jobs, but the jobs are crap jobs. They're wage slavery, and all the middle and upper management would be brought in, from China or the other countries, and they would just take all the assets and resources.
Yeah, outrageous.
So I'm not going to talk about this call, but maybe in a call or two, I'll talk about extensively what we're doing in Sierra Leone. We're turning that model completely upside down. Great. And we're going in truly in a way to create a new paradigm and a new model that will benefit the people and honor the land and respect the land and actually help lift the country out of its mire that it's in without binding it with more debt. And
so there'll be a new banking system and everything there.
Right. So somebody asked about that. We'll come back to banking and money in a moment.
Okay.
We've wandered through the question, but it gets down to the core level of contract and jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And so, and the concept of the only way out is in. And so if one doesn't polarize with the current world system and understands that at some level, somewhere, including the spiritual nature of the contracts that you brought up, that we actually did this with conscious and purposeful intent. We came onto this planet, those who have the passion and the concern to change this world, we all came here. We took it upon ourselves. It's what I call taking on the clothing of the realm. And we did contract. And so when you say the Anunnaki, they don't follow the laws, they break the laws. But at some point, a very long time ago, there were contractual relationships and agreements that we did also bind ourselves, those you and I and others. But we did that because we know we are way more powerful than their projected hologram of duality and, hierarchical dominance and control, and that we would come into this life and we would heal ourselves and we would go back to center. We would understand the way out is in, and so we don't have to counter anything. We just have to go within and reconstitute, recreate ourselves as vibrant whole beings with greater capacity, and that when we come together in a unified field, the power of that, and there's a reason why there's this phrase that says 2 or more in my name. When 2 or more in my name come together, it has nothing to do with religion, has nothing to do with what the church says it is. What is the word name? The name is the signature frequency. And it's not my as in some external being or savior, which he wasn't. That's just what the church overlay was. But the name is the resonance, is the unique frequency. And when 2 beings who are centered and whole come together, they create a exponential magnification of the power of creation. So if 10 people come together or 100 people come together with a singular focus on doing what is best for all beings and all life, and we start moving that in the direction that our reanimated will directs it to go towards, that we state, this is my will, this is my intent, this is the purpose for which I am directing it, and that purpose is to heal myself, heal the planet, assist others to do the same, and come together. There's nothing that can stop it. It's the force of creation.
Brilliant.
So the belief that we can't do that is a externally overlaid inculcation of a false belief.
A lie, basically.
A what?
A lie, basically.
It's a lie, yeah. Well, what's in the middle of the word belief?
Exactly.
Be lie.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and when you study law, you understand that we also abandoned our will. We were trained in religion. It's not my will, but thy will be done. And that's externalizing your will to what? To an aggregate AI Godhead that posits itself as something good, polarized with something that's bad, but all it is it's the same thing, splitting itself in half and polarizing itself and getting humans to play one part or the other. And, and there's also this new age belief out there that, the nasty ones, they just, they just played a role, they just took it on and played a role. And I don't believe that the ones who are nasty, who we see doing what they're doing out there, that is who they have become. That's who they contractually agreed to for benefits that they thought they would have, and they had for a long time, but now it's all collapsing because it's not based on true universal principles. And that principle for me is summarized in one simple statement, which is honor the life force in all beings and do what's best for all of life. And if you do that, everybody's happy. Except for the ones who just want it all for themselves.
So we have stories of people who were on the elite list on this world who apparently are using children's feared blood, adrenochrome. I mean, if that is real, I mean, is that real, Ken? Do you think that's just a made-up story of fear or power?
No, I'm quite certain that it's very real. And the thing is that this is what the apocalypse, the splitting open and revealing is all about. Because this has been what's been going on this planet for thousands and thousands of years, and it is the foundational basis of all religion in this world. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when I say that, I think in terms of, Buddhism and other very nonviolent kind of approaches. Is that true for them? No. In fact, I have to withdraw that statement that I just made and just say on the western half, the western hemisphere of the collective mind of humanity, that has been true. But on the eastern side, it's been more of a passive acceptance of that as a reality. So the Western mind was able to achieve dominance and control through geopolitical and monetary and banking function.
Because, I mean, again, Buddhism and all the rest of it, all those nice religions, they're still massive control. I mean, seriously, people are still sitting on their arses and doing nothing.
Well, exactly. That's exactly it. They're passive.
Yeah.
And is that a good thing to do in part of your life? Take 2 years and just go totally within and do,
possibly.
That absolutely.
Yeah.
We've lived many lives, so I'm sure we've all lived lives of complete passivity and going in and stuff like that. This life is, at least for me, is not what it's about. It's about action. It's about being first and then directing that being into purposeful creation for the purposes of transformation.
Yeah.
So it really gets down to money as a fundamental. It gets down to law and jurisdiction, which leads me back to what I wanted to introduce. As I've made it very clear, I don't believe in the God concept. I don't believe in binding myself to the law of the priest. I don't believe in anybody doing that. I know that that's not the way to true, wholeness and integration, all that. But it is hardwired in the hologram that we're in. So I've actually spent most of my life studying the nature of religion and studying the Bible, Christianity, Judeo-Christian, where it all came from, going back to Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, and all the rest of it, and then unraveling the layers of the Bible from the surface mind control and bondage of the religious construct and the belief in an external priest who will tell you the law, and you follow that law to gain, salvation, all that, to the deeper levels of commerce and then equity and esoteric constructs, and then the AI-driven computer program that gives the appearance of perfection that, it's too vast, too perfect for a mere mortal to have, or even a set of mortals to have written it. And the reason I bring this up is because there is a lot of universal truth also embedded in the Bible and in religious structures and so forth. And it's the matter of unraveling it and seeing where the control mechanisms, the disinformation, and where the key components that we need to be aware of where they are.
Because they have to have truth in there, Ken, because they wouldn't be able to get away with it for all these centuries.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's also a pre-scripted, the Bible I'm speaking of, it's pre-scripted to fulfill the end point, which was to completely lock into perpetual bondage through monetary contracts the entirety of the population of this planet.
That was the plan. That still is the plan.
Yeah, and by doing that, control what? the interface between the physical and the multi-dimensional, which is the, the biological genetic material. And genetics are both biological and multidimensional. So it was, and I talked about this in one of our conversations before. Hang on, I got to clear my throat.
No worries.
And I don't want to go into that in this conversation, but the reason I bring all this up is I mentioned that there's a group that I'm working with now that Panterra is very strategically aligned with, and it has come to us in a very logical sequential unfolding of our process of the last 30 years. And basically, it also is sort of a variation on the phrase, the only way out is in. So many people studying law, looking at status correction or other components of what they thought would free them from the legal system, did so on the basis of, okay, how do I, as an individual, do these steps and get free?
Yes.
But the bottom line is, nobody's free if everybody is unfree, and you just happen to have achieved a level of separation from the system. And you can say, well, I'm free, I don't pay taxes, I don't do this, I don't have to follow the traffic laws or stuff like that. But that's not true freedom. True freedom is when we're all free. And so in order to achieve that, we have to have a collective body that fulfills what is hardwired in the original script that was designed to take us down, and flip it over and use it to be our doorway out of how we came into all of this. And essentially that's what Trump is doing. Because and one of the questioners said, well, Trump is saying he's hardwiring, fast-tracking Operation Warp Speed to have all these vaccines. And he's contributed to this, he's contributed to that. It appears that he's aligned with the vaccine program. And he also is, if we're in a national emergency, then that means FEMA is in control. And that's not really true. I'll get back to that in a little bit.
Okay.
But in Trump's situation, everything was designed from 1933 to place complete and absolute control in the office of the president, specifically something called the executive office, which is a different entity than the actual presidency. That was formed in the late 30s into the 40s, and it's called the office of the executive. Everything was put into the office of the executive to be a singular, controllable office that controlled everything, judicial, legislative, executive, all under the administration of the bankruptcy and the military occupation. And because everything got outpictured onto a global scale through the corporate structures, then all the national corporations that were subsequently put into bankruptcy, roughly 250 national corporations, they were all subdivisions of the one Washington, D.C. corporation that were all controlled by the money system and enforced by the military. So when Trump stepped into that office, he had all that power. And everything was moved because they knew the playbook of what the deep state and the Democrats, as the tool of the deep state, would do to move the country into what we see happening during the course of this year, with the COVID quarantine and the riots and basically, war in the streets and social disruption, basically insurrection. They were going to do that in a controlled way, but in a way with the office of the executive and the president would fold it into the end time script. A lot of the book of Revelations is the end time script that was going to be facilitated by the nuclear war between Russia and the United States. Mm-hmm. So why do I know Trump's a good guy? Does that mean that he's crystal clear and he's as as pure as a Buddhist monk? Or no. I mean, he had to play the game. He had to look like everything that that they were, greed and manipulation and so forth. And I don't, I'm neutral in terms of what his past career was. I'm sure he did nasty things, and I'm sure he was what some people come out and say, well, he was, a ruthless kind of businessman. But I've also heard a lot that he was also very compassionate too. But that's then. This is now.
Yeah. Now he actually has the COVID apparently.
Well, yeah, and that's another question that's debatable. But let's not go there for the moment. Okay. But the fact is that what's self-evident is that the day he was elected, not even before he inaugurated, they were setting up to attack him. Even before he was elected, everything that's coming out now, they were going to make sure they were going to take him down and do this coup that they've now been caught red-handed with. And they don't do that for one of their own. They don't do that. He is just like some people are saying, oh, he's just, he's playing the good guy, but he's just walking you into the New World Order. It's just not true. It's not happening that way. And so basically we have two things on this planet, state and church. The line of the king to control all the land, which is the state, and the line of the priest to control the law, to bind the flesh of the people, to bind them to the law, to the rules of the public domestic zone. And then when they die, because they die with a monetary debt, they can then be converted to karmic debt, and they control the souls to be able to reincarnate and recycle and basically have an internal loop that we would never get out of, and that just keep feeding off of us until we expire. Right. And then entrap other souls and beings and keep doing it. That was their game plan. That was their Luciferian intention, to be like God.
If people look at what's been going on, Trump is probably the most disrespected president that the United States has ever had.
By far, not even close.
Yeah.
There is no second place. He just, so, but the point is this, that there are only two basic control mechanisms, the state and the church. Mm-hmm. There's the line of the king, so that you control the land and lift the people off the land, put them in a containment field, and in that containment field get them to be contractually bound to the line of the priest, the law of the priest or the church. Because see, all these codes and statutes out there, they're all really just religious binding requirements. It's all a religious construct. And so it is in sum total the line of the priest, the law of the priest. And so within that context, there are two things that, let's call it the grand cosmic conspiracy of all conspiracies. Okay. That we as a collective body, we meaning those beings who are now awake or awakening to having a passion for healing and transformation and returning this earth to its pristine form and having all life be honored in this world, that we knew this. We knew this millions of years ago. So we took on the clothing of the realm, we turned ourselves inside out, and we basically knew that at the end of their movie, the end of their script, we would take back control by taking control of the line of the king and the line of the priest through state and through the church. Okay? Mm-hmm. And that what Trump is a being who was precisely capable of designing both this lifetime and many, many lifetimes in a nonlinear way. In other words, knowing the end from the beginning and so forth, and be able to set his life up in the precise, perfect way, economically, business, monetary, and so forth, to step into taking that position and becoming the Trump card to Trump, all of history, and turn it around and return it back to the people.
You have absolutely great faith in Trump. So is that based on inner knowledge?
Yes, it is. And it's not so much faith in Trump per se. It's faith in the whole of what I know and what I've learned and what I see and what I interface with at many, many levels. So, yes, I do as an absolute. There's no question in my mind that his position is what I've described, which was to take the office that was going to be used in the final chapter of this vast planetary story that was going to lock us into perpetual enslavement by voluntary consent. Because if they had collapsed the world, had nuclear war between Russia and the U.S., and both countries were pretty decimated from that, and China had been prepped to be largely out of that and remain unscathed or mostly unscathed, and have the position that it would have in terms of controlling 1.4 billion people in a vast machine of factories and all that they built up to, and controlling resources in Africa and Asia and a lot of the United States infrastructure, to step in, because they also owned a lot of the governmental and monetary and banking infrastructure here too. Nice. And they owned a lot of companies in around by proxy and layering and stuff like that, up to a range of 30%. And if you own 30% of a corporation, you can control it, but you can also do it without being visible, and you can do it by proxy, by having multiple entities own smaller portions, but the key is controlling the voting stock. And they, and everything's a corporation. The state of California is a corporation. There's something called CAFR funds, CAFR, which is called the Consolidated Account Financial Report. Have you ever heard of that before?
I have, yeah.
Okay, well, what it means is that there's a backside to the public reporting of when they say that, California is in a deficit, or this city of Stockton went bankrupt, or any and all that stuff. That's the public books. That's what binds the public to the debt system municipally. You have your individual franchise debt, you have the public debt through the city and the county and the state you live in, and all the rest of it, and the federal, and it's all structured so that the public is bound to the debt. But on the private side, they have the integrated or consolidated accounting, which is all the assets that every corporation, municipal corporation, has been buying for decades, that they don't have to report on their annual budget. Okay. And so who owns those corporations? Well, the master corporation. Who owns that master corporation? The City of London. Who owns the City of London? The Pope, the bankers, etc. But what's important about that is the revenue from those stock dividends don't go into the public budget. They stay on the other side. So it keeps building and building. And over the last 80 years, they've gained majority control over every corporation that has any level of control of industries or whatever. So he who controls the voting stock controls the reality. And so China was prepped in a lot of ways. They had 30+% of Wells Fargo. They had many industrial corporations. I'm sure they've got a lot in the tech industries and so forth. And Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Biden, with all his stuff in Ukraine and China and everything, they were all on the dole, on the program, and they were hardwired by their contractual subjugation of their being to, basically sell their soul to the devil. So that's how China was going to.
It's happening here in Ireland as well. I mean, there's word.
Of course, yeah.
There's word that they're actually going to be building in the next 10 years a city, possibly half the size of Dublin, so a big city. And apparently they're going to be emigrating Chinese people to be residents of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Now, this has got nothing to do with the Chinese people. I love Chinese people. I love China. It's the CCP and what their role was in the global agenda.
Right.
So, the vast majority of Chinese people are just like everybody else, just like the Russians are wonderful people, and et cetera, et cetera. It's the overlay of the consolidated governmental lock on all of these national corporations.
But the Chinese government are known for killing people if they just have different spiritual ideology than their own.
Well, of course, yeah. So that's why they're the perfect governmental entity to step in to be, the controller of the 21st century. That's how it was intended. That was the end part of the program. But we are much more intelligence to that. Life is an intelligence of creation as creation that you could say in poetic terms, for a season, they were allowed to do what they have done. At the end of it all, it's all being turned over. The apocalypse is opening up, revealing who they are, back to the thing you asked about, blood sacrifice and stuff. And then we veered off about saying, well, the Eastern half didn't necessarily do that. But in the Western motto of religion, it was all based on blood sacrifice. We have fairy tales about the village that had to put the virgin girls out in the plaza so that the dragon could come out of its lair and eat the virgins to agree not to harm the rest of the village. They've been doing this they meaning humanity has been doing it for thousands of years to sacrifice its children to some external force that said, I'm the God, and if you don't do what I say and follow my rules, I'm going to put my priests in place that you're going to follow their dictates. I'll come destroy all of you, but in the meantime, follow my rules and just feed me your children.
But I don't understand how any one human who gives a shit would have said yes to them.
Well, but you have to understand mass mind control. You have to understand self-focus. Like, if you're a relatively ignorant, farming community, and you produce 8 to 12 children per family because some die in childhood from disease or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And it said, well, you just have to give up one of your children, and every family has to do that. And we appease the gods. I could spend a day going through all the religious
sacrificing firstborn
and show you where this is hardwired in every religion.
Well, believe it or not, Ken, I had a whistleblower from the Freemasonry way back a couple of years ago. James was on the show, and he read out the Freemasons' oath of the 33 and
that's pretty nasty. And then tried the Jesuits one.
Oh my God,
that's even worse.
It's incredible. I mean, to actually, and that means every archbishop in the Vatican has already taken that oath, which means killing firstborn children, murdering children, etc.
That's right. So you asked about spiritual contracts. Well, those are spiritual contracts. They bind the being or the spirit essentially eternally until you resolve it by facing it and really dealing with it, which most of these beings are too far gone to do so. So they're going to self-eliminate as the resonant frequency of this planet solidifies or congeals into a cohesive, unified field of honoring all of life. It's going to just break it apart so that, and you can see it now. They're all pretty much going nuts.
So is it going to happen without, mass suicides and depression and all this stuff first?
Well, I don't know. I can't answer that. I think there's a lot of that. But it depends who. Is it going to be the ones who have perpetrated and consciously took on those spiritual oaths and bound themselves to it? Remember, this is a sovereign free will universe. So they took that on in their own sovereign free will. We took on a lot of contracts and so forth out of ignorance, and therefore we can correct it by, the steps that I've discussed.
Yeah.
And, but so let me get back to where I'm leading this. So, but just to finish that one point up, they all then become, over time, they become secularized and mythologized and made into fairy tales and children's tales, like the maypole that, you have kids dance around the maypole. Well, that's just so deeply hardwired into the esoteric of the Isis-Osiris mystery cult and the castration of the male and the artificial phallus and the obelisk and the control of the genetics. Well, that's one thing. Another thing in the Christian modality is this concept of the blood of the lamb, and this mass sacrifice, and that becomes a cannibalistic ritual. Here, drink the blood of Jesus, drink the body of Jesus. Well, that's just cannibalism, and then now you have stories all over the place of all this mass GMO food that has matter of from fetuses and other things that are put into the food. So you are becoming, when you eat all that crap, a cannibal, technically speaking, atom by atom. If you have a fraction of it, energetically, it's still, eating the body, drinking the blood. It's all programming. Where did that come from? Well, in the Mithraic period, which goes back 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, where the worship was the bowl. And it was the bowl because we were in the period of Taurus, or the astrological house for 2,000 plus years of Taurus. And then it went to Aries. Well, Taurus is the bull, Aries is the ram, or what is the innocence of the ram or the sheep is the lamb. So there was worship of the bull during that period of Taurus that later got turned into the Catholic Spanish ritual of bullfights, subjugating the bull.
Crazy,
that's a ritualistic blood sacrifice thing where you have crowds screaming and all the rest of it. And so, but the initiates during the period of the ram, they would dig a pit and they would get in it and they would put a screen or a lattice work over it and they would slit the throat of a lamb and you would be washed by its blood. And that was part of the blood ritual that then gets changed into all kinds of things. And so, but
it's incredible, like fox hunting as well. I mean, I lived in a place called Cheltenham in England, which had a massive fox hunting base. It was very Tory, very conservative town. And I remember demonstrating at one of their hunt balls that they have, and we got into the building, and they had children, sort of 10, 11-year-olds, not very young, so 10 upwards, children standing on a stage whilst they doused them in fox blood as a bloodletting.
Well, I did not know that. I knew that. So that is the end point of the fox hunt. So you're saying they do the fox hunt, they would get it, they would kill it, and they would do a blood ritual with the children. Yeah, it's all variations. We could spend days going over all the detail, but this is the basis. And it's fundamentally one, drinking the blood of innocence, where children who are pubescent, who haven't gone into puberty, there's a qualitative innocence to the being in the physical body if it hasn't been traumatized and abused. And that's why they do the pedophilia for the sexual energy from the innocence, but then they turn the innocence into trauma-based, mind control and everything, and then they just keep going to the nth degree to where they sacrifice it, and then they create the adrenochrome through the adrenaline and the fear, and that's what they feed off of. But they feed off of it because they are hardwired by contract to non-physical beings. You can call them demons, you can call them whatever, but the beings who are sort of the lower astral level of the containment field, who their job is to maintain the lower level of low frequency that keeps us split and unable to rise above the duality and the control of fear and all the rest of what we live in this soup. And so if we look at it objectively in terms of understanding the who, the what, and the why, then we can see how a whole historical construct has been put in place over thousands and thousands of years to lead us to this point where the control of the land, the flesh, and the souls would be perpetualized, meaning it would be forever in a perpetual loop that we could never get out of. And that's really what we were facing just a matter of months and years ago. Trump in the office on the state side now has the power to turn it around. What has happened in all the months leading up to this month to set it all up has been perfectly orchestrated, and we are going to watch in the next 4 weeks and then beyond an absolute exposing and flipping over. People think that Trump's on the ropes. He's been beat up by all this stuff. No, he's been a perfect lure. And I coined a phrase a while ago. We are the lure and we are the cure. And so we have lured them in to think that they had us forever. And by our having taken on the clothing of the realm and having the transmutational capacity of being able to transform it and heal it within ourselves and then collectively as the whole, we are curing the disease of separation and false duality and all the rest of it. So leading to the thing I wanted to introduce, it relates to the proclamation that your listener asked about. Yes. That on the religious side, on the church side, there's this thing called the Bible. It's split into two testaments. Always remembering the testament is based on the word testes, which means the testicles, the male progenitive biological capacity to procreate the race. That in the Isis-Osiris mystery cult basically memorialized or religified the ceremonial castration of the male, which happened to Osiris, and then he became the god of the underworld, and he became the god of the dead, where when you died, if you had paid obeisance by paying enough money to the priests, they would do the rites and rituals, according to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, to pass to the gates of where the dead are judged, which are the scales. There would be the scales held by this being called Ma'at. Mm-hmm. And if your heart was heavier than a feather, you would not be passed and you would be recycled. But if you had become one of the elite by accruing the money to be able to pay the priests, then you paid your way, quote unquote, into heaven. Okay, and that was the basis of all of that. And so the Bible is based on that, okay? We don't have time to go into the history. I go into this in other areas of my work inside Gemstone, and more we're going to be able to put this into films and documentaries and animated materials to show this, where it all interconnects. And I have one pretty old now seminar I did 9 years ago called How It All Fits Together, that's on the Gemstone YouTube site for anybody who hasn't seen it. And I go into a lot of this. But it's evolved in the last 9 years, and I've come to understand more key and important parts of it. And basically, the Old Testament set the ground for essentially, this is your God, and you will worship him. and then what the New Testament set up to create a control mechanism for giving up voluntarily the control of our soul or our being or our signature frequency to both church and state, until at the end of time, church and state would be fused into one. And it established this blood lineage called the House of David in the Old Testament, and said at the end of time, the House of David would come back and there would be a new King David. And this was going to be used in the same way as the office of the president, to become a control mechanism to dominate and control through the church and the risen or the resurrected House of David. The other part of the Old Testament was the establishment of the Babylonian priesthood. So you have the so-called captivity, Babylonian captivity, and who was programmed or who was inculcated into the wiles of the Babylonian mind control, money magic system was the priests, the Levites. And then they were released, and basically that priesthood has spent the last 2,500 years creating the Babylonian money magic system. Why is it magic? Because it's the ability to entrain the creator capacity beings to believe they have no creator capacity, and it's all projected into blocking the red shield, blocking our grounding into the physical body, so that we could be mind controlled and entrain our creator capacity into this money system, so that we would believe we would only be able to control or create if we had money. And the only way you had money is if you sold your soul to the satanic elitism, as we see now being revealed. So that basically is what the Old Testament set up. It said the House of David would return. Well, there is a man who is that return or the conclusion of that, and his name is David. And 10 years ago, he established the kingdom of David. Well, why is he special, or not special, but unique with all the other millions of men named David? Because he actually is the direct lineal descendant of King David and Solomon, 124 documented generations up to his present life. And mathematically, that's literally impossible to maintain a lineage of 124 on the male side, not female and then splitting up in other marriages. There's only 5 families that have been documented to have more than 90 successive documented generations. And that's beyond astronomical in terms of odds. And only one of them is above 100, and this is this man David, and this is who I met 18 months ago. And given my understanding of history and law and religion and everything, I wasn't particularly necessarily inclined to say, "Oh, great, that's wonderful. Let's run the flag up for the kingdom of David," as you can imagine. But I have spent a lot of time with him, and I understand that he essentially is the same or the equivalent as what I described with our friend Mr. Trump, that he's the game changer. He's the one who came in to flip the entirety of that ancestral lineage. That lineage came from in the area that we call in the Middle East, or Jerusalem, Palestine. And it moved eventually, some generations later, and became the first kings of first of Ireland, and then many successive generations and kings, and then eventually the family line became also the kings of Argyll, which is a precursor of Angleland or England, as well as then the Scottish kings. So virtually all the major kings of Ireland and Argyll and Scotland are his grandfathers going back generations. And then the family came over to Nova Scotia, which means New Scotland, and became the major landholders of Canada and North America, eastern seaboard. And they were the founders of the Hudson Bay Company, and many other things. They are actually significant underwriters of the American Revolution. And then they kind of went underground into being more, average people. And he was an average boy who did not even know who he was until he was 50 years old. His parents kept it from him, but that was about 25 years ago. And then when he came to understand who he was in that historical lineage and so forth, he said, okay, I'm supposed to create the kingdom of David. He's Christian, grew up in that religion. And so he did that. But he did it as a service body politic for the benefit of the world. He also did it on what he understood, because he was very involved in law and business, in a corporate form, in a monetary form that basically was still hardwired to the old system. Sure. But when I met him 18 months ago, I said, this is who I am. This is what Panterra is. This is what we're doing in terms of taking what's in the control mechanism system and using it on the basis of law and other elements, and creating a private jurisdiction. And when we control our jurisdiction and have the means to monetize value and create a treasury and monetary system that is not based on the control mechanisms of debt and the Babylonian money magic system, then we have something that's more powerful than anything else, because the entire world system is basically built on the binding requirement to honor this structure and jurisdiction. And so what I've been doing, working with David for the last 14 months, is shifting the law form and the jurisdiction to the pure form of private law, and structuring it with everything that I've developed through Panterra and all of the Panterra members who have come along with me in the last 6-7 years, of which now there are many hundreds who are very well educated and capable of working as a team and in teams to shift into the utility of this jurisdiction. And the key here is that the way out is in. The way out of the bondage of the civil body is to leave the matrix or walk out of Babylon. And what are the there's three primary expectations of the New Testament. And of course, there's the overlay that the church set up to control everybody and get them to basically follow the Pied Piper over the cliff. And those three things were basically, well, obviously, the fulfillment of the book of Revelation to destroy a third of the population and make all the waters red with blood, and one massive global blood sacrifice, basically, and complete what we talked about earlier with China. Of course, the carrot on the stick was the second coming. Follow the law of the priest, and you will then be one of the chosen one. You will be saved. Okay, right? Everybody else, they're going to go the other way. But the other two was that the house of David would return and resurrect or reconstitute or reinstitute the house of David, or the kingdom of David. And the other is the fall of Babylon.
Right.
Well, the fall of Babylon is very simple. When the money machine that binds everybody to the law of the priest, or with the law of the priest, to be in the containment field, to be living flesh, to be fed off of, because they do not know how to create, but they can entrain us to create for them, that is the Babylonian money magic machine. That's the civil body containment. That is the public, domestic, codified, statutory, legal realm, and monetary debt bondage. And it said, walk out of Babylon. Well, how do you walk out of Babylon if there's no place to go? Well, if you step back into life, that's where we go. How do you do that? You don't do it by an external government, an external form. You do it within yourself. You become centered in your heart, and you direct everything in your being towards the greater whole and to life itself. But we're in a global system that requires a jurisdictional grounding point. So the kingdom of David, and along the way, as I was working with him about 10 months or so, one day I woke up and I thought, what is it about that word David? What's this Davidic line, and how did the negative path co-opt that? Because basically all of the royal houses of Europe came from a bloodline that presupposes or presumes that they come from a Davidic line, but it's a very manipulated, false reality that came through southern France called the Merovingians, and up through Paris and the Carolinians and Charlemagne, leading to the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman civil code system.
False symbols all the way, Ken.
All symbols, all of that, all the heraldry and all that crap. So, but what is that name David? Well, if you take the consonants, DVD, that's also been used as a control mechanism through the electronics. What were we watching and staring into in the TV sets that were programming our brains and our minds 20 years ago were DVDs, right?
Yeah.
But if you take DVD, and as the consonant-based languages like Hebrew or Aramaic and others were set up, that the insertion of vowel-type sounds were done as a kind, and I'm not a master of those languages, but the basis of the linguistics were the consonants, and the vowels were the sort of the qualifying sounds that come from the throat. If you put an apostrophe, it changes it. If you put other symbols, those are other vowel sounds. But if you put apostrophe after a D, and then you take the VD, that's your consonant basis for the word vida or vitality, which means life. So the true house of David is not about a king. It is not about royal lineage or any of that crap. All of that stuff is reptilian overlay to control people, to worship an outside king or a priest or a savior or all the rest of it. But what it is in the true form and the purity of it is its life. So the house of David is really the house. You take the first A and you put it on the end, put an apostrophe there. It's the house of Davida, the Vida, the life.
And if you think about it, you say David, take the consonants only and it's DVD, but then you're left with the two vowels, which is AI.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Which obviously is one of the most controlling mechanisms to have come out of technology.
Exactly. But if you take the A and you move it to the N and you have D apostrophe V-I-D-A, what you have is I-A, which is the I am.
Okay.
So the I am presence of each individual unique frequency signature expression as an individuated expression of source creation. It's an I am presence.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good because it needs to be reversed from AI, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's all they do. They mirror reverse everything.
Yeah.
So we're looking into the mirror thinking it's the real thing, but we're in Alice in Wonderland. We're backwards.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is how I want people to understand the house of David. And so because the line of the king was set up through London and the second crown, we have a triple crown in Vatican City, City of London, and D.C. The City of London was the crown to control the law and out of the law, the money, and basically the land. Mm-hmm. Hence the British Empire and their age of conquest and the law of the flag and all that, and the doctrine of discovery and so forth. And so I lost my train of thought there.
Okay.
Oh, I know. So that's really, you could see the situate, or the situs of the crown to control the land is the City of London. The situs to control the law is Vatican City. The situs to control the flesh and hence set up the harvesting of the souls is Washington, D.C., by the suppression of the people through the military overlay, and then the bondage through the commercial paper out of really New York and through D.C. So being on the land, and if you talk to people who've studied law, they all say, we're lost at sea, lost in the sea of commerce. We need to return to the land. We need to have standing on the land, which is true.
Yes.
But in an energetic, spiritual, relational sense between a living being who comes into a planetary realm and the body of the being who is that planet itself, that is a spiritual contract too. Hang on. Put this lozenge back in my throat, my mouth to coat my throat.
Nearly 2 hours of talking, Ken. It can get to you.
Yeah, well, I think we got about 20 minutes to go.
We do, of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, we do need to get back onto the land, but let's look at it in non-law terms, non-legal terms. And, we do the status correction, and ultimately we claim our standing on the land and blah, 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 all that. But it's an energetic relationship. It goes back to what you said as the spiritual contract, because you don't come on, when you're following universal law, you don't come onto a planetary body that is a living being. It's not a dead rock in the sky. It's a living being who allows, by mutual benefit, mutual contractual relationship, you to be on her body, to advance your being and to contribute to the whole. So there is a valid spiritual and planetary relationship by contract with being on this planet.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to let you know, Ken, that we've got less time because we did have a break. So we've got a 20-minute interview already in the can, if you like. So we've only got about 6-7 minutes left.
Oh.
We can go on a bit longer if you wish.
Yeah, we need to, but
okay.
I'll wrap this up. Let's go 15, okay?
Okay.
Can we do that?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, hang on. So getting back to the land, meaning severing the contracts that keep us in this false containment field that's lifted off the land, has to do with getting into our body, centering in our being in the body, and reconnecting with the harmony and resonance of the collective whole and the planetary body. When you do that, you can't go destroy the environment or kill animals wantonly and all the rest of the crap that those who are disconnected from the planet, which is most of humanity now, who will do that without thought because they think, oh, well, this is just a shell and I'm going to go off somewhere and be in heaven or whatever the variation is, and I don't have to worry about this world. That's contrary to every principle of life and universal law that there is. So that's what we're returning to, back to the land, back to life. And the City of London as one of the three crowns, and the whole concept of the Pope declaring in 1302 and onward, the land belongs to us and all the flesh and souls belong to us as well. That we have to reverse that. We have to rescind, revoke, and terminate those contracts and return to the Lamb. And the way to do that, the only way out is in, is to have a world-recognized jurisdiction that cannot be rebutted or refuted. That is essentially the return of the true kingship that really is the people, but has a basis in the historical continuum of law, for thousands of years that all other bodies politic, nation states and otherwise, and institutions like the church, like otherwise institutional entities, are legally, lawfully, and universally bound to recognize. And I've come to understand with working with David that that's absolutely true in the case, and that we, what I've been doing by shifting all of the knowledge I have into restructuring the basis of the law form and the jurisdiction, is that we have a mechanism, and I can only summarize it here. Next time we can go into the detail.
Sure.
But the bottom line is we have the mechanism, we have the place or the receptacle where we could walk out of Babylon to sever the contracts and walk into life, be in a house of life, Davida, and return to the land and have the mechanisms by which we both have standing in the land and we can come together in a unified way while still honoring the sovereign integrity of all beings and all groups of beings on the planet, of which is like a vast diversity of beings, as well as how they come together politically or culturally and otherwise. And so the proclamation that I referred to last time that your listener asked the question about is a proclamation and decree by David, and it's called a proclamation for peace and sovereign integrity.
Okay.
And we are building the website for that right now to be published probably in about a month. There's a lot of work that we have to do for that. Mm-hmm. And concurrently working with David to take the steps to perfect the jurisdictional superiority of the kingdom. And again, I want people to be really clear, this is not a kingdom to reinstitute or continue the same old story of a hierarchy and an alpha male and I'm the king and you're my subjects and all the rest of that. I spent a lot of time, continue almost every day, doing so, making sure very clear that that's not what we're doing here. And David is humbly and very directly in full alignment with that.
Okay.
Because if he wasn't, I wouldn't be doing this. But I understand now that this is truly the shift of the world system and the mechanism by which the people will be able to return to standing on the land, to take control of the law, because we're structuring the law form in the courts on the model that I've developed for 20 years with Panterra. And the primary authority is called the court of the ecclesia, which is the body, the living body of those beings, human beings, men, women, and children, who choose to rescind the presumption of consent with all these contracts we've talked about and walk out of Babylon, walk out of the matrix and step into life and be able to build in a distributed, non-centralized way our lives and our communities and our societies in alignment with universal law, and also not contrary to man's law, in the sense that embedded in man's law are principles of universal law. It's a matter of separating the wheat from the chaff, separating the false reality from that which is true, and having sovereign integrity. That's the key. So it's a proclamation of peace, and all who wish to enter a contract with that proclamation, and I wrote the proclamation, so I can guarantee you it doesn't have any hooks in it.
Okay.
It's very clean, and within a month, people will be able to see it, and the sovereign integrity is first and foremost the sovereign integrity of your free will choice to be the master of your own embodiment.
Brilliant.
Which is what is the key here. Because in that embodiment, your flesh, blood, bone, and DNA, genetic material, is what the parasite has always been after, to get you to voluntarily consent to abandon your estate, your living landed estate in your physical form, to their executorship, to control it, to be able to take it forever into their false monetization enslavement system.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's brilliant. Well described, and I hope your work with David continues.
Well, I know it will, and over the next months, and I will caution people who will, I know, go on the internet and start looking for it. There are several websites that David and his people created over the last 8 years. They have a lot of pieces that are still, quite true and valid in terms of purpose and intent. But there's a lot of law form that we haven't gotten to restructure truly into the private jurisdiction. So you'll see a lot of things that don't seem that they're not in alignment as far as corporate form or otherwise, and just overlook that and know that we're building the foundation to be the way I've described. And there's a couple groups who are saying they're the kingdom of David, but they're not part of this David and his lineage, and really the fulfillment of it, in terms of the law, in terms of everything else that I've described, has to be linked to that ancestral lineage, and he is the only one now. He's got a brother, a couple of brothers, and of course sons, and that's been all established and worked out. But the key is this particular David, his unique timing of when he was born, the life process he went through to wake up to all of this, and then basically meeting with me and Panterra and transmuting the old form that he was basing things on into the new, which is based purely as a pure resonant field in life, and without the hooks or attachments and so forth. So it's a work in progress. The proclamation will be published soon, and it honors the sovereign integrity of every living being, and especially the first people in their domains. It obviously honors, because we have to honor what is, the nation state, but the first people, of which there are many thousands of what people call tribes or bands, and erroneously misnomer called First Nations. They're not First Nations, because the word nation is another hooked trap. It was purposely set up in the 1700s with the book called Law of Nations to lead to the Union of Nations, or the United Nations, to create a false unity, a false corporate construct. And to wrap it up and to say, as I did earlier, that the next month leading to the election, Trump is not going to be removed from office. There are going to be things opened up and revealed extraordinarily in the next 30 days and beyond. Those who are culpable of pretty serious crimes against humanity, crimes against the United States, treason, sedition, insurrection, they are all going to be brought to justice. And once we get through this period, there are things that are going to happen in terms of the monetary system and a new system, and as well as what we can do in building our own jurisdiction through the David House and so forth, that really answer all the questions people have posed. Well, how are we going to do this differently? Where are we going to do it? All the things that I mentioned in the questions, like one question said, there's a looming civil war. How will we avoid it? Well, for one, there's not going to be a civil war. It's going to be taken care of. I can't say how, just watch. Secondly, this person asked, this being, would Panterra be able to keep itself out of the fray? Yes, by going to peace, standing as peace and in our own jurisdiction. And the key of the sovereign integrity is not to hierarchically place the House of David or the kingdom above everybody. It's used as a transitional pivot point so that we are all standing in equal station, whether it's an individual being, two beings who come together as a partnership, or a First People domain, or any other variation, that the proclamation says to the world that David is not trying to reinstitute or continue hierarchical kingship. He's here to open a door so everybody can walk in, to stand individually and in unity as in their sovereign integrity. And this is going to assist the first people who have been genocided and attempted to be destroyed in the many thousands of first peoples. It's going to assist them to return to the land. And that's very key, because they're the first peoples, because they were and are the true resonant holders of the relationship to the land where they were situated and the planet. And that's why they were, quote unquote, civilized to be lifted off the land. This mechanism, this proclamation of sovereign integrity, is the means by which we can all return to the land, and especially the first people, to be able to do that and actually truly build lives of, honor and respect and integrity for themselves.
Well, we look forward to that, Ken. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the time allotted, yep. Unfortunately, because I do have an hour of wonderful rebellion music to play.
Okay. All right.
But listen,
no problem.
Absolutely fantastic for the 9th in this wonderful series that having you on, Ken. Please, everyone, check out www.panterrapca.org and gemstoneuniversity.org. And I want to say, Ken, I'm looking forward to hearing more about David and others' situations.